Cassidy Brennan found them in her cabin at dawn. 3 men she'd never seen before, rifling through her deed box like they owned the place. Boot prints tracked through the flour she'd spilled the night before, white dust marking their path from her door to her brother's old desk. The lead man didn't even have the decency to look startled. He held up a piece of paper, official-looking seal catching the early light. "Bank inventory of abandoned property," he said, voice flat as the prairie. "You got 90 days to prove continuous occupancy, Miss Brennan, or this land goes to auction. I've occupied it for 3 years. My brother before that, back to the '86 land run." The man smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Set the paper on her table like he was doing her a favor. "Then you got nothing to worry about? Clock started yesterday?" Outside, her 2 Mustangs stamped and snorted. She whistled once, sharp, and heard them charge the porch. The men's smiles died fast. The men left in a hurry after Ghost and Ember put their heads through the open door. Ears pinned back and teeth showing, Cass didn't stop them. Just stood there with her braided lariat in one hand, watching them stumble over each other to reach their horses. When the dust settled, she picked up the paper they'd left behind. Official bank letterhead, signed by James Hartwell. Foreclosure proceedings initiated due to insufficient documentation of valid homestead claim pursuant to territorial survey revision. The words blurred together. She read them 3 times before they made sense. And even then they didn't make sense at all. June appeared in the doorway to the sleeping loft, her long dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She wore her father's cavalry belt buckle over her nightdress, had worn it every day since Cass buried him 3 years back. What did they want? June's voice still carried sleep in it, but her eyes were sharp. 16 years old, and she'd already learned to wake up ready for trouble. Nothing good. Cass folded the paper, tucked it into her vest pocket. "Get dressed. We got horses to work before the heat sets in." The dawn ritual had carried them through worse. Cass believed in starting each day the same way, rope work in the corral, teaching June the patience it took to gentle a wild thing without breaking its spirit. Her brother had taught her that, back when she was younger than June and thought she knew everything. Ghost, the gray Mustang, stood 17 hands and had the temperament of a thunderstorm. Cass had found him half dead from dehydration 2 summers back, nursed him through it, and he'd never left. Now he followed her around the corral like an oversized dog, protective in ways that made visitors nervous. June climbed the fence rail, watching as Cass worked a green 3-year-old mare through figure 8s. The rope sang through the air, a sound like wind through canyon rocks. The mare fought it at first, then found the rhythm, moving with Cass instead of against her. "Aunt Cass," June's voice carried a question she'd been holding back. "What if Pa's claim papers weren't real? What if we can't prove he filed proper?" Cass kept her eyes on the mare, didn't let the question break her focus. "Your Pa filed legal in '86, same as 2,000 other folks in the land run. I got the deed certificate in that box those men were pawing through. But what if that's not enough?" The mare stumbled, caught herself. Cass shortened the rope, brought her in close, ran a hand down the animal's sweat-darkened neck. The smell of horse and dust and August heat wrapped around them both. "Then we'll find what is enough." She looked up at June, saw fear trying to hide behind a tough face. "You trust me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then trust me on this. We ain't losing this place." But 3 hours later, standing in the Red Bluff Bank with her hat in her hands, Cass felt that certainty crack like old leather. James Hartwell sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his narrow nose, and wouldn't meet her eyes. He'd been cordial enough when she'd first arrived, offered her a chair, asked about the ranch, commented on the heat. Then she'd asked about the foreclosure notice. His whole manner changed. "It's the new railroad survey," he said, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "Vernon Locke is coordinating the corridor purchases for the Kansas and Oklahoma Rail Company. They need to verify all existing claims along the proposed route. Standard procedure. My land's not on any railroad route." "The survey says different." Hartwell pulled out a map, unfolded it across his desk. Blue lines marked property boundaries. A thick red line cut straight through the northwest corner of what should have been Brennan land. "See? You're right in the path. Mr. Locke needs clear title to make his offer." Cass leaned over the map, studying the lines. Something about them looked wrong. Too neat, too convenient. "I never saw any surveyor on my property." Survey was conducted from adjacent parcels, legal and binding. "Who owns the adjacent parcels?" Hartwell cleared his throat, looked past her shoulder toward the back office. "That would be Mr. Locke. He purchased them last spring." The back office door opened. A man stepped out, well-dressed in an Eastern suit that had no business in Oklahoma heat. He wore a gold watch chain across his vest and cologne that cut through the bank's smell of paper and ink. Vernon Locke extended his hand. Cass didn't take it. "Miss Brennan," he said, smooth as snake oil, "I hope James has explained the situation. I'm prepared to offer you $800 for your parcel. More than fair, given the circumstances. The circumstances being you're trying to steal land. My family's worked for 3 years. Locke's smile never wavered. The circumstances being you have 90 days to provide documentation the territorial office will accept. If you can't, the land goes to auction. I'm simply offering to spare you that embarrassment. Behind him, through the office window, Cass caught sight of June waiting outside with the horses. The girl was watching the bank door like it might explode. Cass picked up her hat. I'll prove my claim. Legal and proper. I hope you can, Locke said, but his tone said he knew something she didn't. She was halfway to the door when Hartwell spoke up, voice barely above a whisper. Miss Brennan, the original claims from '86. There was a fire at the territorial office last month. Records were damaged. Cass turned back. How damaged? Hartwell wouldn't look at her. Extensively. The general store smelled like coffee beans and leather, familiar and safe, until Cass walked through the door and every conversation stopped. Mrs. Chin stood behind the counter, organizing tins of tobacco with more attention than the task required. 3 townswomen clustered near the fabric display. Louise Kemper, Sarah Mills, and the banker's wife, all suddenly fascinated by calico patterns they'd ignored for months. Cass had come for salt and cornmeal. Simple supplies, paid for with credit she'd earned through 3 years of prompt payments. She set her list on the counter and waited. Mrs. Chen picked it up, read it twice, then set it down again. Her hands shook slightly. I'll get these for you. Her voice came out too quiet. She disappeared into the back storeroom, leaving Cass standing alone while the 3 women whispered behind their hands. The whispers weren't even subtle. Can't manage land by herself. That poor girl living out there. Vernon says she hasn't made improvements. Louise Kemper's voice rose above the others. I heard he's been asking questions about the niece's schooling. Seems to me a young lady deserves better than breaking horses and living like a frontier savage. Cass turned slowly. Louise had the decency to color, but she didn't take it back. My niece is learning skills that'll keep her alive when fancy needlework won't, Cass said, keeping her voice level. And I'd appreciate you keeping your opinions about my family to yourself. Sarah Mills touched Louise's arm, a warning, but Louise shook her off. It's not opinion, Miss Brennan. It's concern. Vernon Locke is a respectable businessman with connections to proper institutions back east. If you can't provide for that girl's education and future, perhaps you should mind your own business. Mrs. Chen returned with the supplies, packed them into a cloth sack with hands that still trembled. When Cass reached for her credit book, Mrs. Chen waved her off. Pay next time, she whispered. Then even quieter, people saying you can't manage the land alone. Vernon's been asking questions about June's schooling, about whether you're fit guardian. The words hit like cold water. What? But Mrs. Chen was already turning away, attending to Louise Kemper's suddenly urgent need for thread. Cass took her supplies and walked out into the afternoon heat. June sat on the wagon bench, holding the reins loose while their mare dozed in the harness. The girl's face asked questions Cass didn't want to answer. We getting what we need? June asked. For now. They rode home in silence, the wagon wheels cutting through dust that wouldn't settle. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun hung low and mean, turning everything the color of old brass. A rider was waiting by their gate. Young man, couldn't be more than 20, wearing a courier's bag across his chest. He dismounted when he saw them approach. Miss Cassidy Brennan? That's me. He pulled an envelope from his bag, thick paper with an official seal. You've been served, ma'am. Sign here. Cass signed without reading, took the envelope. The courier mounted up and rode off fast, like he was afraid she might change her mind and shoot the messenger. June climbed down from the wagon, moving slow. What is it? Cass broke the seal, unfolded the papers inside. Legal documents, 3 pages of dense text. But the header was clear enough. Petition for emergency guardianship transfer. Her vision tunneled. She read the first paragraph, then the second, then had to start over because the words weren't making sense. Vernon Locke, as concerned citizen and coordinator of regional development, hereby petitions the territorial court to review the guardianship of minor child Juniper Brennan, currently under care of Cassidy Brennan. Evidence suggests the child's current circumstances, isolated frontier dwelling, lack of formal education, exposure to dangerous livestock activities, constitute inadequate provision for a young woman's proper development. Aunt Cass? June's voice came from very far away. What's it say? Cass flipped to the second page, found the paragraph that made her blood run cold. Petitioner has located correspondence from the child's deceased father, Samuel Brennan, expressing wishes that in the event of his death, his daughter should receive proper education befitting a young lady of good character. Petitioner's sister, Mrs. Dorothea Whitmore, operates the Sacred Heart Academy for young ladies in St. Louis, Missouri, and has graciously agreed to accept Miss Juniper Brennan as warden student. Let me see. June reached for the papers. Cass pulled them back, but June was quick. She grabbed the edge, read over Cass's arm. Her face went white. Pa never said that. June's voice shook. He never said I should go to St. Louis. He said you'd teach me to be strong, not some fancy lady who can't do nothing useful. I know. He said it when he was dying, Aunt Cass. He made me promise I'd stay with you, learn what you know. He said, her voice cracked. She was crying now, angry tears that she scrubbed away with her sleeve. This is lying. That Vernon Locke is lying about what Pa wanted. Huh. Cass folded the papers, tucked them into her vest next to the foreclosure notice. 2 pieces of paper that together could take everything she had left. Come on, she said. Let's get this wagon unloaded. How can you be so calm? June's voice rose, broke.
He's trying to take me away.
Send me to some school where I don't know anybody, where I'll have to wear dresses and learn stupid things that won't help anybody. I'm calm because getting upset won't help. Cass climbed down from the wagon, started hauling supply sacks toward the cabin. We'll figure this out. How? You said you proved the land claim, but Mrs. Chen said the record's burned. Now Vernon's got some fake letter from Pa, and people in town already think I'd be better off somewhere else. How are we supposed to fight that? Cass set down the sack of cornmeal, turned to face her niece. The girl stood in the wagon bed, silhouetted against the setting sun, wearing that cavalry belt buckle like armor that wasn't quite strong enough. I don't know yet, Cass admitted, but I know we don't give up. Your Pa taught me that, and I'm teaching you. Now help me with these supplies before the light goes. They worked in silence as the sun dropped below the horizon. Inside the cabin, Cass lit the lamp and reread both documents while June heated leftover stew. The words didn't get better with repetition. 90 days to prove a claim when the proof had burned. An emergency guardianship hearing scheduled for 3 weeks out, and Vernon Locke's signature on both documents, neat and confident. June set a bowl of stew in front of her. The girl's eyes were red, but she'd stopped crying. Aunt Cass, what if we can't stop him? Cass looked at her niece, this girl she'd raised for 3 years, taught to rope and ride and face down what scared her. Samuel's daughter, wearing Samuel's buckle, asking questions that deserved honest answers. Then we go down fighting, Cass said. But we ain't there yet. June sat down with her own bowl, picked up her spoon, set it down again. I'm scared. I know, me too. Really? Really. Cass reached across the table, squeezed June's hand. But being scared just means you understand what you stand to lose. Now eat. Tomorrow we ride to town and find us some allies. But when June finally went to bed, and Cass sat alone in the lamplight, staring at those 2 documents spread across her table, she wondered if allies existed for a woman trying to hold on to land and family against a man who controlled the bank, the judge, and apparently the dead's last wishes. Outside, Ghost and Ember moved restless in the corral. Cass heard their hooves on packed earth, their low wickers in the dark. At least the horses were still hers, for now. Isaiah Wells's forge sat at the edge of Red Bluff, close enough to be useful, but far enough that the noise didn't bother anybody who mattered. Cass could hear the hammer before she saw the place. Steady rhythm like a heartbeat, metal on metal, honest work that didn't require lies. She'd brought a broken bridle that needed riveting, but that was just an excuse. What she really needed was someone who'd look her in the eye and tell her the truth about what she was facing. Isaiah stood at his anvil, working a horseshoe into shape. He was 68 if he was a day, but his arms still had the muscle of a man who'd spent 40 years in hard labor. Buffalo Soldier, 10th Cavalry, back when that meant something. He'd settled in Red Bluff after his discharge, set up this forge, and proceeded to outlast everyone who'd said a black blacksmith wouldn't find work in Oklahoma Territory. He looked up when Cass dismounted, nodded once, and finished his current piece before setting down his hammer. The sudden silence felt loud. Miss Brennan, he wiped his hands on his leather apron. Been expecting you. Word travels fast. Word travels exactly as fast as fear lets it. He took the broken bridle from her hands, examined the split leather and bent hardware. This'll take me about 20 minutes. You want to wait or come back? I'll wait. Isaiah jerked his head toward the back of the forge, where he kept a small table, 2 chairs, and a coffee pot that was always hot. Help yourself. I'll join you when I'm done. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, exactly how Cass needed it. She sat in the chair that faced the forge opening, watching Isaiah work. His movements had the precision of someone who'd learned early that mistakes in his line of work could kill. You army discipline married to blacksmith's care. 2 customers arrived while she waited. Dutch Herman from the saloon, bringing fireplace tools for repair, and a rancher named Cole, who needed new hardware for his barn door. Both men saw Cass sitting there. Both men's conversations with Isaiah got quieter, quicker. They paid and left without acknowledging her. When Isaiah finally joined her, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee, his face showed nothing. He settled into the other chair with a grunt that spoke of old war wounds and older age. So, he said, Vernon Locke, you heard about the foreclosure? Heard about that. Heard about the guardianship petition, too. Isaiah sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. Man moves fast when he wants something. He wants my land for his railroad corridor. And he wants more than that. Wants to prove a woman can't hold property alone. Wants to set an example. Isaiah set down his cup, leaned back. I've been in this town since '72. Seen a lot of men like Vernon Locke. They don't just take what they want, they need everyone to watch them take it. Makes them feel powerful. Cass wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. The forge fire crackled behind them, and the whole place smelled like coal smoke and hot metal and honest sweat. Records at the territorial office burned, she said. My deed certificate's not enough. Bank wants original homestead claim documentation. Which burned. Convenient timing. Isaiah's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes got harder. That fire was 3 weeks ago. Vernon Locke was in town that week, staying at the hotel. I remember, because he had me shoot 2 horses for him, paid in cash. You think he said it? I think timing's a funny thing. I also think you didn't come here to discuss philosophy. Cass met his gaze. I came because I need someone who will testify I've been working that land continuous for 3 years. Someone the court might actually listen to. And you think they'll listen to an old black soldier? I think they'll listen to a man who keeps records of every transaction in this town and has for 30 years. Isaiah's eyebrows went up. You know about my ledgers? Your wife mentioned them once before she passed. Said you drove her crazy with your record keeping, but she understood why. Army habit. Army habit saved my life more than once. Isaiah stood, walked to a locked cabinet against the back wall. He opened it with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. Inside were leather-bound ledgers, stacked neat and numbered by year. He pulled one out, carried it back to the table, opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. August 14th, 1886, he read. Samuel Brennan, new homesteader, ordered custom horseshoes for 2 mares and a gelding. Paid half up front, half on delivery. Said his sister was coming out from Kansas to help him prove up his claim. He turned pages, found another entry. November 3rd, 1886. Cassidy Brennan, repair work on splitting mall handle. Said she was clearing timber for winter firewood. Talked about learning to break horses. More pages. April 12th, 1887. Cassidy Brennan, riveted bridle repair. June 22nd, 1887. Cassidy Brennan, custom forged fence staples. January 9th, 1888. Cassidy Brennan, horseshoe order for 3 animals. He kept reading, entry after entry, documenting every time Cass had come to his forge with something that needed fixing or making. 3 years of steady visits. The kind of pattern that only made sense if you were living somewhere, working somewhere, building something that mattered. I document everything, Isaiah said quietly. Every transaction, every customer, every piece of work, because I learned early that a black man's word against a white man's word don't mean much unless you got proof written down in ink that won't fade. Cass stared at the ledger, feeling something crack loose in her chest. This could prove continuous occupancy. It could, if a judge will accept it. If Vernon Locke don't challenge its validity. If, he stopped himself. There's a lot of ifs, Miss Brennan. But it's more than I had this morning. That's true. Isaiah closed the ledger, but kept his hand on it. I'll testify. I'll bring every ledger I got if it helps. But you need to understand, people in this town are scared. Vernon controls credit at half the businesses through that bank. He's got contracts with the railroad that could bring jobs, prosperity. Folks who might have spoken up for you are thinking twice. What about you? He could pressure you. Isaiah smiled, sharp and bitter. I'm 68 years old. I own my forge outright, paid off years ago. I got no family left to threaten, no debt to leverage. I'm about as free as a black man in Oklahoma Territory can be, which means I'm free enough to tell Vernon Locke exactly what I think of him. Cass stood, extended her hand. Isaiah shook it, his grip still strong from decades of hammer work. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. We still got to convince a judge, and judges in these parts have a funny way of seeing only what powerful men want them to see. Then we'll make it hard for him not to see. She left the forge with her repaired bridle and something she hadn't had when she arrived. Hope, fragile and fierce, built on ledger entries and an old soldier's stubborn belief in documentation. But halfway back to the ranch, riding past the church, she saw Father Miguel Santos sweeping the steps. He looked up as she passed, met her eyes for one brief second, then looked away fast and went back to sweeping. That look told her everything. The priest who'd witnessed her brother's homestead claim was afraid to help her. And if a man of God was scared, what did that say about everyone else? Ghost died on the 4th day of the drought's worst heat. Cass found him in this morning, collapsed beside the empty water trough. His sides heaved with the effort of breathing, tongue swollen and dark. She ran for the well, cranked the pump handle with everything she had, but nothing came up except a dry rattle and the smell of scorched metal. The well had run dry. June appeared in her nightdress, saw Ghost struggling to rise, and let out a sound that was half sob, half rage. She dropped to her knees beside the Mustang, pressed her face against his neck. "Get water from the rain barrel," Cass ordered, her voice tight. "All of it." They carried buckets between them, poured water into Ghost's mouth, over his head trying to cool him down. The gray Mustang drank some, but his eyes had already gone distant. He'd been in bad shape when she'd found him 2 years ago, dehydrated, starving, half wild. She'd thought she'd saved him, thought she'd given him a good life. Now he was dying again, and this time it was her fault for not seeing the well was failing. By noon, Ghost stopped breathing. Cass sat in the dust beside him, one hand on his still warm shoulder, while June cried into her apron. Ember stood at the corral fence watching. The brown Mustang called out once, a sound of loss that echoed across the empty prairie. "Why won't it rain?" June's voice came out broken, childlike. "It's August. It's supposed to rain." Cass didn't answer. She was staring at the survey stakes she'd noticed yesterday, driven into the ground 50 yards north of her property line. New stakes, painted with property markers. She stood, walked toward them, leaving June with Ghost's body. The stakes marked the creek that ran through the adjacent parcel, the creek her well water came from, underground seepage that had always been reliable. The stakes had names painted on them. Vernon Lock, Territorial Survey Parcel 47B. She followed the stakes east, counting. They ran for a quarter mile, marking what should have been open territory. But the final stake sat right at the edge of her well. Vernon Lock now owned the water rights to her only water source. Cass walked back to the cabin, pulled out the foreclosure papers, and reread them with new understanding. The territorial survey revision wasn't about the railroad corridor. It was about water. Vernon had bought the adjacent land, claimed the creek, and was now choking her out by legal means instead of illegal ones. Clever, ruthless, completely legal if the survey was legitimate. She saddled Ember, told June to stay at the ranch, and rode for Red Bluff. The courthouse sat on Main Street, a 2-story brick building that looked more important than it was. Judge Marcus Locke, Vernon's cousin, she'd learned from Mrs. Chen, held court there twice a week. Today was one of those days. The courtroom was already full when she arrived. Vernon sat at the plaintiff's table with a young man she didn't recognize. Thin, nervous-looking, with surveyor's tools and a case beside him. The judge sat behind his bench, reading through papers with the careful attention of someone who already knew what he was going to decide. Cass took a seat in the back. She hadn't been summoned for this hearing, but it was public record. Anyone could attend. "Mr. Locke," the judge said, looking up, "you've petitioned for emergency water rights clarification." Vernon stood, smooth as silk in his eastern suit despite the heat. "Yes, Your Honor. Recent territorial survey revealed that the creek running through parcel 447B, which I purchased last spring, extends underground to feed several adjacent properties. One of those properties, the Brennan homestead, has been accessing water without proper rights documentation. And you're requesting that the court acknowledge my rightful water ownership and enjoin Miss Brennan from further unauthorized use." The judge looked at the surveyor. "You conducted this survey?" The young man stood, hands shaking slightly. "Yes, sir. Tommy Watkins, certified territorial surveyor. I conducted a comprehensive water rights assessment 2 weeks ago. The underground creek originates on Mr. Locke's property, and he swallowed hard. And the Brennan well is drawing from that source without legal easement. Do you have the survey maps?" Tommy pulled out rolled papers, spread them across the table. Cass couldn't see the details from where she sat, but she watched Tommy's face. He looked sick, guilty, like a man being forced to lie under oath and knowing it. The judge studied the maps for less than a minute. "Mr. Locke's claim appears valid. Miss Brennan has 30 days to secure alternative water access or negotiate easement rights with Mr. Locke at fair market rates." "Your Honor," Cass said, standing. Every head in the courtroom turned. "I'd like to contest that survey." Judge Locke peered at her over his spectacles. "Miss Brennan, you weren't named as defendant in this hearing. I'm the property owner being affected. That gives me standing. Do you have evidence the survey is inaccurate?" "I have a dead horse that says my well's been drawing from the same source since 1886. I have my brother's original homestead claim that included water rights to all existing sources on the property." "Your brother's claim is currently under foreclosure review," Vernon said, not bothering to stand, "which means its provisions are suspended pending verification." The judge nodded. "Mr. Locke is correct. Until you prove valid claim to the land, you can't claim rights to its water. So he gets to kill my livestock while I wait for your process? I'm prepared to offer emergency water access at $12 per week, Vernon said, finally standing. He pulled out a contract, pre-written, renewable weekly contingent on timely payment, $12 a week. Cass did the math fast. That was nearly $50 a month, more than she could afford, and Vernon knew it. Within 2 months, she'd be bankrupt. Within 3, she'd have no choice but to accept his buyout offer. This is extortion, she said. This is business, Vernon replied. Take it or leave it, Miss Brennan. Judge Locke removed his spectacles, cleaned them with deliberate slowness. Miss Brennan, you have 2 choices. Accept Mr. Locke's generous offer or secure alternative water within 30 days. This hearing is concluded. The gavel fell. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Cass walked out into the afternoon heat, her hands shaking with rage she couldn't afford to show. She'd known the system was rigged, but seeing it operate so openly, so efficiently, so completely in Vernon's favor, that was something else. She was untying Ember from the hitching post when she heard footsteps behind her. Miss Brennan, Tommy's voice, quiet and scared. I need to, that survey? Save it, Cass said, not turning around. You did what he paid you to do. Oh, he paid me $200, Tommy blurted out. To adjust the creek bed coordinates by 30 feet, to make it look like your well's drawing from his property, when it's not. Cass turned slowly. The young surveyor stood there, sweating through his shirt, holding a rolled paper in trembling hands. This is the real survey, Tommy whispered. The one I did before he paid me to lie. Your well's been on your property all along. The creek bed hasn't shifted since territorial mapping in '83. He shoved the paper at her. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I lied under oath and a horse died because of it. I don't know what to do, but I can't keep this anymore. Cass took the paper, unrolled it enough to see the original coordinates. They proved everything she'd suspected. Why tell me now? Because I'm not who I thought I was, Tommy said, voice breaking. And I need to be able to look at myself in a mirror again. Behind them, Vernon emerged from the courthouse, saw them talking, and his expression went cold. Tommy saw it too, went pale. He'll ruin me, Tommy whispered. He'll try to ruin both of us, Cass said. Question is whether we let him. Vernon was walking toward them now, purpose in every step. Vernon stopped 5 feet away, close enough that his cologne cut through the street's smell of dust and manure. He looked at Tommy, then at the rolled paper in Cass's hands, and his smile never wavered. Watkins, he said, voice pleasant as Sunday morning, I trust you're not sharing confidential survey data with unauthorized parties. Tommy opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The survey's a matter of public record, Cass said. Anyone can request a copy. The certified survey is public record. Vernon's eyes stayed on Tommy. Original field notes and preliminary drafts remain property of the surveyor and his client. Isn't that right, Mr. Watkins? Tommy nodded, barely. Good. Then I'm sure you haven't done anything that might jeopardize your territorial certification. Vernon turned to Cass. 7 days until auction, Miss Brennan. Water access is $12 a week, as stated. Or you can accept my standing offer of $800 for the parcel and be done with all this unpleasantness. I'll see you in hell first. Vernon's smile widened. Hell's a relative term. But I suspect you'll see bankruptcy before either of us sees eternal damnation. Good day. He walked away, boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk, gold watch chain glinting in the sun. Tommy looked like he might vomit. I shouldn't have. He's gonna... Go home, Cass told him. Don't talk to anyone. And hide that original survey somewhere he won't think to look. Yeah, you don't understand. He controls everything. The bank, the judge, half the businesses in town. If he wants to destroy me, then you're already destroyed. Question is whether you go down telling the truth or telling his lies. Cass mounted Ember, looked down at the young surveyor. You gave me this map. That took courage. Don't waste it by running now. She rode back to the ranch. The survey map rolled tight in her saddlebag, like evidence of a crime that everyone knew happened, but nobody could prove. June was digging when Cass arrived home. She'd chosen a spot north of the cabin, under the cottonwood tree where the shade ran deep in the afternoon. Ghost's body lay wrapped in an old blanket, ready for burial. Cass dismounted, picked up the second shovel, and dug without speaking. The earth was hard, dried out from weeks without rain. They worked for an hour, sweat soaking through their shirts, until the hole was deep enough to be respectful. They lowered Ghost together, arranged the blanket so his head rested easy. June stood silent, her father's belt buckle catching the fading light. She didn't cry this time. Just stood there, looking older than 16, harder than any girl should have to be. Say something, June whispered. Pa always said words when something died. Cass didn't have her brother's way with words, but she tried. Ghost was a good horse, loyal, brave. He survived once when he should have died, and he gave us 2 good years after that. That's more than most get. We'll remember him. June's voice came out steady. We'll remember. They filled the grave as the sun dropped toward the horizon. When it was done, June stood over the mound of earth and spoke again, quieter. I ain't going to St. Louis. Whatever that judge says, whatever Vernon Locke tries, I ain't leaving. This is home, your family. Pa wanted me here, and I'm staying. June, I mean it. The girl's chin came up, stubborn and fierce. You taught me to face what scares me. Well, this scares me, but I'm facing it anyway. Cass looked at her niece, Samuel's daughter, wearing Samuel's buckle, standing her ground on Samuel's land, and felt something break and mend at the same time. All right, she said, then we fight together. And inside the cabin, Cass lit the lamp and spread the original survey map on the table beside Vernon's falsified version. The differences were small but damning. 30 feet of creek bed, adjusted just enough to put her well on the wrong side of the property line. June leaned over her shoulder, studying both maps. Can you prove it's wrong? Maybe, if I can get Isaiah and Father Miguel to testify. If I can convince the judge to look at evidence he doesn't want to see. If Tommy doesn't lose his nerve. That's a lot of ifs. It's what we got. June traced the creek line with her finger. Pa used to say water tells the truth. You can draw all the maps you want, but water flows where it flows. Doesn't care about property lines. Cass looked at her niece. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we should check something. June grabbed the lamp, headed for the door. Come on. They walked to the well in the gathering dark. June set the lamp down, knelt beside the dry pump, and started pulling away stones from the well's foundation. Cass joined her, not sure what they were looking for until June's fingers found something carved into the stone. Letters, worn but still visible. SB 1886 Samuel Brennan. Her brother's initials, carved when he dug this well 7 years ago. Pa marked everything he built, June said. Said a man's work should carry his name. If this well's been here since '86, drawing from the same source, and the creek hasn't moved, she looked up at Cass, lamplight catching in her eyes. Then Vernon's survey is lying, and we can prove it. Cass ran her fingers over the carved letters, feeling the grooves her brother had cut into stone before he'd died. Evidence that couldn't burn. Testimony that couldn't be silenced. We need more, she said. We need people willing to say they remember this well, this creek, exactly where they've always been. Isaiah will remember. He shoes horses out here every few months. We need more than Isaiah. June stood, brushed dirt from her hands. Then tomorrow we start asking. Every person in Red Bluff who's been here since '86, somebody's got to have memory that's worth more than Vernon's money. Cass looked at the carved initials, then at her niece, standing fierce in the lamplight, and made a decision. Tomorrow we go to the saloon, she said. Dutch Herman's been in Red Bluff since before the land run. If anyone remembers the original creek line, it's him. Dutch don't take sides. Then we make him remember why staying neutral is still a choice. They walked back to the cabin, leaving the lamp burning by the well like a marker for the dead, or a signal for the living. Cass wasn't sure which, but it felt right either way. The town meeting happened 3 nights later in the Red Bluff Municipal Hall, a generous name for a room, above the general store that smelled like old tobacco and newer lies. Every business owner in town packed the space, sitting on benches or standing along the walls. Cass counted 43 people, which meant 43 people who'd have to choose between profit and principle. Vernon stood at the front beside a map of Red Bluff and the surrounding territory. Red lines marked proposed railroad routes. Blue circles marked recommended acquisitions for development corridor. Cass's ranch sat dead center in the largest blue circle. Ladies and gentlemen, Vernon began, voice carrying that eastern polish that made everything sound reasonable. The Kansas and Oklahoma Rail Company has authorized me to extend purchase offers to 17 property owners, fair market value, plus 20% premium for early acceptance. This railroad will bring prosperity to Red Bluff, jobs, commerce, growth. He let that sink in, watched faces calculating what 20% premium might mean to their struggling businesses. Those who accept these offers will be remembered as forward-thinking citizens who helped build Oklahoma's future. Vernon's pause carried weight. Those who refuse will find themselves outside the circle of progress. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, hands folded tight in her lap. The banker, Hartwell, stood against the back wall looking miserable. Dutch Herman leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Now, Vernon continued, I understand some of you have concerns. Miss Brennan, for instance, has been vocal about her reluctance to accept my generous offer, but I think it's important the community understands the full situation. He pulled out a document, held it up for everyone to see. This is a territorial surveyor's report documenting Miss Brennan's failure to maintain adequate improvements on her claim. No cultivation beyond a small kitchen garden. No permanent structures beyond a single-room cabin. No livestock operation beyond personal use horses, one of which died recently due to inadequate water management. Cass felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She stood against the side wall, June beside her, Isaiah on her other side. She kept her face neutral, but her hands wanted to become fists. Furthermore, Vernon said, warming to his subject, there's the matter of her guardianship of a minor child. Miss Brennan is an unmarried woman living in isolation, teaching her niece skills more appropriate for ranch hands than young ladies. I've been in contact with several concerned citizens who question whether this environment is suitable for a girl's development. Louise Kemper nodded vigorously from her seat. Two other townswomen murmured agreement. I say this not to attack Miss Brennan's character, Vernon continued, smooth as snake oil, but to illuminate why some claims should be reconsidered for the greater good of the community. He turned to address the room directly. Each of you has received my offer. Each of you has 7 days to accept. After that, the railroad may choose alternative routes, alternative partners. Red Bluff will have missed its opportunity for prosperity. His eyes found Mrs. Chen. Miss Chen, your store sits on a prime corner lot. My offer is $2,000, more than generous for a building that age. Mrs. Chen's face went pale. She started to stand, to speak, but her husband grabbed her arm, pulled her back down. Vernon moved on. Mr. Herman, the saloon occupies valuable Main Street frontage, $1,500, and I'll help you relocate to a better location in the new commercial district. Dutch's expression didn't change. He said nothing. Mr. Hartwell, Vernon began. The bank's position is already clear, Hartwell interrupted, his voice thin. We support orderly land transfers that benefit regional development. Excellent. Vernon looked around the room. Anyone else have concerns they'd like to voice publicly? Silence, heavy and thick as August heat. Cass watched faces she'd known for 3 years suddenly find the floor fascinating. People she'd traded with, shared coffee with, helped during hard times. All of them choosing to look anywhere but at her. Then I'll take that as consent, Vernon said. You have your offers. I'll be at the hotel until week's end to finalize agreements. Thank you all for your time. People began filing out, moving fast, like staying too long might force them to take a position. Mrs. Chen hurried past Cass without meeting her eyes. Hartwell disappeared down the stairs before anyone could corner him. Within 5 minutes, the room had emptied except for Cass, June, Isaiah, Dutch, and Vernon Locke. Vernon gathered his maps with the satisfaction of a man who'd just won without throwing a punch. Miss Brennan, still here? Still here, Cass said. And still not selling. I admire your stubbornness. Truly, but stubbornness doesn't water horses or prove land claims. He tucked his maps under his arm. 7 days until auction, 6 days until your guardianship hearing. I'd suggest you use that time to reconsider your options. He walked past her, close enough that his cologne made her want to gag. At the doorway, he paused. Oh, and Miss Brennan, that surveyor, young Tommy Watkins, he came to see me this afternoon. Wanted to discuss some irregularities in his original field notes. I've advised him that making unfounded accusations could result in loss of his territorial certification. He seemed to understand. The door closed behind him. His footsteps faded down the stairs. June's voice came out small and scared. Nobody stood up for us. No, Cass agreed. They didn't. Isaiah moved to the window, watched Vernon cross the street toward the hotel. Fear's a powerful thing. Vernon knows it, uses it like a weapon. So what do we do? June asked. Dutch Herman finally spoke, his voice rough from years of whiskey and cigars. You do what people always do when the system's rigged against them. You find the system's cracks and you wedge them open. Cass turned to look at him. You got something to say, Dutch? I got something to show you. Dutch crossed to the table, pulled out a chair. Sit down, all of you. They sat. Dutch remained standing, one hand on the table like he needed the support. I've been in Red Bluff since 1871, he said. Ran a trading post before it was even a town. I remember when Samuel Brennan came through during the '86 land run. I remember him filing his claim at the territorial office, back when it was just a tent and a clerk with a ledger. He looked at Cass. I remember your brother digging that well in July of '86. He came to my saloon after, bought drinks for everyone, showed off the blisters on his hands, said he'd hit water at 30 feet, right where the old creek bed ran underground. You remember the creek location? Isaiah leaned forward. I remember better than that. Dutch smiled, sharp and bitter. I got a photograph. The room went still. What kind of photograph? Cass asked. The kind Vernon Locke don't know exists. Town celebration, July 4th, 1887. We took a group picture in front of the church. Your brother's in it, standing beside his wagon. Behind him, clear as day, you can see the creek running through what's now supposedly Vernon's property. Dutch pulled a key from his pocket. Photos locked in my safe at the saloon. Been there for 7 years. I'm thinking maybe it's time someone took a look at it. Why now? June asked. Why didn't you speak up at the meeting? Because Vernon needs to think he's won, Dutch said. Needs to think everybody's too scared to stand against him. Man who thinks he's won gets careless, gets arrogant, makes mistakes. He looked at each of them in turn. I don't pick sides easy. Bad for business. But watching that man threaten a woman and a girl, watching him use fear like currency, he shook his head. Some things are bad for the soul, and I'm too old to die with a soul that dirty. Isaiah stood, extended his hand. Dutch shook it. When do we see this photograph? Cass asked. Tonight, Dutch said. After the saloon closes, come through the back door, and bring anyone else who's got evidence Vernon don't want seen. And Sunday service started at 9 in the morning, when the heat was still bearable and faith still felt possible. Cass sat in the back pew with June, both of them dressed in their cleanest clothes, which wasn't saying much. Isaiah sat across the aisle, his Bible worn smooth from decades of reading. The church was half full, better attendance than Cass expected, given how many people had avoided her eyes at the town meeting. Father Miguel stood at the pulpit, leading the congregation through hymns that echoed off whitewashed walls. His voice carried the weight of a man who hadn't slept well in days. When the singing ended and people settled into their seats, Father Miguel didn't launch into his prepared sermon. Instead, he gripped the pulpit edges and looked out at his congregation with something that might have been fear or might have been determination. I want to talk today about silence, he said, about the things we don't say because saying them costs too much. The church went very still. There's a woman in this congregation who needs help, who needs witnesses to stand up and tell the truth about what they've seen, what they know to be real. His voice wavered, then steadied. And I have been silent. I have been afraid. I have chosen my safety over her justice. Louise Kemper shifted in her pew. Hartwell stared at his hands. So I'm asking now, Father Miguel continued. I'm asking if there is anyone here who will stand with Miss Brennan when she faces the court. Anyone who will testify that her claim is legitimate, that her guardianship is proper, that the accusations against her are built on lies. The silence stretched out. Seconds became a minute. Cass felt June's hand find hers under the edge of the pew. Nobody moved. Father Miguel's shoulders sagged. I see. Then I will testify alone and pray that one voice is enough. Cass stood. The scrape of wood on wood echoed through the church. She started toward the door, June following, not wanting to watch good people choose fear over conscience. She was 3 steps from leaving when Isaiah stood. I'll testify, he said, voice clear and strong. I got ledgers that prove Miss Brennan's been working that land continuous for 3 years. Any judge who won't look at 30 years of documented transactions ain't interested in truth. Cass stopped, turned back. Mrs. Chen rose slowly, her husband pulling at her sleeve. She shook him off. I will speak, Mrs. Chen said, her accent thicker when she was nervous. Miss Brennan, she pay her debts. She treat me with respect when others don't. I remember her brother. I remember when she come to help him. This I will say. Dutch Herman stood next, casual as if he'd just decided to stretch his legs. Reckon I'll talk too, he said. Got some things the court might find interesting. And one by one, people rose. The livery stable owner, the seamstress who'd made June's one good dress, a rancher named Cole who'd bought horses from Samuel 7 years back, an elderly woman who'd been midwife to half the territory, 12 people total. Not the whole congregation, but enough. Enough to prove Cass wasn't alone. Father Miguel's eyes were wet. Thank you. God bless you all. After the service ended, Father Miguel asked Cass, Isaiah, and June to wait. When everyone else had left, he led them to the small office behind the altar. The room smelled like old books and candle wax. He unlocked a cabinet, built into the wall, pulled out a leather-bound registry. Church records, he explained. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, and witness documents. He opened the registry to a page marked with a ribbon, turned it so they could see. July 18th, 1886. Homestead claim witness Samuel Brennan, parcel 127, Oklahoma Territory. Witnessed and sealed by Father Miguel Santos. Below that, in careful script, was a full description of the property boundaries, including notation of established creek bed running northwest through adjacent open territory, providing natural water source to claimed parcel. I kept this, Father Miguel said quietly. I knew someday there might be questions. The territorial office was new then, disorganized. I didn't trust that records would survive, so I made my own. He pulled a folded paper from between the registry pages. And I kept this. It was a copy of Samuel's original homestead claim, stamped with the territorial seal, and Father Miguel's witness signature. Every detail matched what should have been in the burned records. Why didn't you show this sooner? June's voice carried anger and relief in equal measure. Because I was afraid, Father Miguel admitted. Afraid of Vernon Locke. Afraid of losing what little influence I have in this community. I chose safety over truth. He looked at Cass. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Cass took the document, felt the weight of paper that could save everything she had left. Don't apologize, and she said, you just testify. I will. Father Miguel closed the registry, locked it back in the cabinet. The hearing is in 3 days. I'll bring this document and my testimony, and I'll pray that truth is enough. They left the church together, stepping out into noon heat that shimmered off the packed Earth Street. Across the square, Cass saw Vernon Locke standing outside the hotel, watching them. He was too far away for her to see his expression, but his posture said everything. He knew something had shifted, knew his carefully constructed trap had developed cracks. He looks worried, June observed. Good, Isaiah said. Worried men make mistakes. But Cass wasn't so sure. Vernon had controlled every step of this dance so far. Even now, with witnesses willing to speak and documents proving her case, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had one more move planned, something they hadn't seen coming, something that would make all their evidence meaningless. The hearing took place on the church steps at 10 in the morning, when the sun was already mean and the dust wouldn't settle. Judge Marcus Locke had agreed to an outdoor proceeding, claimed the courthouse was too small for the crowd that wanted to watch. But Cass suspected the real reason was that Vernon wanted everyone in Red Bluff to see what happened when someone challenged him. The judge sat behind a makeshift bench, 2 sawhorses and a plank. Vernon sat at a table to the right, papers stacked neat, gold watch gleaming. Cass stood to the left with Isaiah beside her, and June just behind. The whole town turned out. People lined the church steps, spilled into the street, watched from windows. Even the children had come. Sensing something important was happening, Judge Locke called the proceeding to order with a gavel that sounded like judgment itself. We're here to address 2 related matters, he announced. First, the foreclosure proceeding against Parcel 127, currently held by Miss Cassidy Brennan. Second, the guardianship petition concerning minor child Juniper Brennan. Mr. Locke, present your case. Vernon stood, every inch the successful businessman. Your Honor, the matter is straightforward. Miss Brennan cannot provide original documentation of her homestead claim. The territorial records were destroyed by fire. Without proof of valid claim, the land reverts to available territory, which I am prepared to purchase at fair market value. Miss Brennan, your response? Cass stepped forward. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice came out steady. I got proof, Your Honor, multiple forms of it. She nodded to Isaiah, who opened his leather satchel and pulled out 3 ledgers. He set them on the judge's makeshift bench with a solid thump. Isaiah Wells, Your Honor, blacksmith, been in Red Bluff since 1872. These ledgers document every transaction I've conducted for 30 years, including regular business with Miss Brennan and her brother since August 1886. Isaiah opened the first ledger to a marked page. August 14th, 1886. Samuel Brennan orders custom horseshoes. November 3rd, 1886. Cassidy Brennan repairs splitting mall. April 12th, 1887. Your Honor, Vernon interrupted. Ledgers can be fabricated. They prove nothing except that Mr. Wells is a thorough record keeper. They prove continuous occupancy, Isaiah shot back. 3 years of regular transactions, the kind you only make when you're living somewhere, working somewhere, building something permanent. Judge Locke examined the ledgers, flipping through pages with obvious reluctance. Interesting, but Mr. Locke is correct. This is circumstantial. Then let me provide more than circumstance, Father Miguel said, stepping forward. He carried his church registry in the folded document. I am Father Miguel Santos. I witnessed Samuel Brennan's original homestead claim in July 1886. I kept a copy, as was my duty as witness and record keeper for the Catholic diocese. He set the document on the bench. This is that copy. Sealed, dated, and notated with full property boundaries, including the creek bed that Mr. Locke now falsely claims runs through his parcel. The crowd murmured. Vernon's expression tightened. Your Honor, Vernon said, voice still smooth but with an edge now. I question the validity of a document conveniently produced only after territorial records were destroyed. How do we know this isn't a recent fabrication? Because I witnessed it, Father Miguel said firmly. Before God in this community, the seal is territorial, dated 1886. The ink has aged 7 years. Any expert can verify its authenticity. Judge Locke studied the document with the careful attention of a man looking for an excuse to reject it. But the seal was official. The signatures were witnessed. The date was clear. This appears legitimate, he admitted slowly. There's more, Dutch Herman said, pushing through the crowd. He carried a framed photograph. July 4th, 1887, town celebration. We took this picture in front of the church. He held up the photograph. In it, 20 people stood in front of Red Bluff's small church. In the background, clear as day, a creek ran through what Vernon now claimed was his property, and standing beside a wagon, grinning at the camera, was Samuel Brennan. That creek, Dutch said, pointing, has run through that spot since before the land run. Every person in this photograph can tell you exactly where it was. And it wasn't on Vernon Locke's parcel. It was on open territory, feeding into Samuel Brennan's well. Vernon stood abruptly. Your Honor, there's more, Cass said. She pulled out the 2 survey maps, Vernon's falsified version and Tommy's original. These are water rights surveys. One is the official version submitted to the court. The other is the original field survey, before it was altered. Judge Locke took both maps, compared them side by side. The differences were small but damning. 30 feet of creek bed shifted just enough to change everything. Who conducted these surveys? The judge asked. I did, Your Honor. Tommy Watkins stepped forward from the crowd, his face pale but determined. I'm a certified territorial surveyor. Mr. Locke paid me $200 to adjust the creek bed coordinates in my final report. The original survey shows Miss Brennan's well has always been on her property, drawing from a creek that runs through open territory, not Mr. Locke's parcel. The crowd erupted. People shouted questions, accusations. Vernon's face went dark red. This is preposterous. Vernon slammed his hand on the table. These people have conspired to fabricate evidence. That surveyor is lying to save his reputation. I'm lying to save my soul, Tommy said quietly. I lied once for money. I won't do it again. Judge Locke held up his hand for silence. The crowd settled, but barely. Watkins, you understand you're admitting to fraud under oath. Yes, sir, I do. And I'm prepared to face consequences. But Miss Brennan shouldn't lose her land because I was too weak to tell the truth the first time. The judge removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly. The silence stretched out like rope before breaking. In light of this evidence, he said finally, I find that Miss Brennan has provided sufficient proof of valid homestead claim. The foreclosure proceeding is dismissed. Relief hit Cass like a physical thing. June grabbed her hand, squeezed hard enough to hurt. Furthermore, the judge continued, the water rights ruling is vacated, pending investigation into survey fraud. Miss Brennan's access to her well is restored immediately. Vernon stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides. His gold watch caught the sunlight, bright and useless. As for the guardianship matter, Judge Locke said, Miss Brennan, would you have the young lady step forward? June released Cass's hand and walked to stand before the judge. She wore her father's cavalry belt buckle over her simple dress, and she stood straight as any soldier. Miss Juniper Brennan, the judge said, do you wish to remain under your aunt's guardianship? Yes, sir, June's voice carried across the silent crowd. My pa's last words were that Aunt Cass would teach me to be strong. She has, and I ain't leaving her. Can you read? Yes, sir. Aunt Cass teaches me every evening. Can you cipher? Yes, sir. I keep the household accounts. Can you manage a household? I can cook, clean, mend, tend livestock, and break horses, sir. I can do everything a woman needs to know to survive out here? Judge Locke looked at Vernon. Mr. Locke, your petition suggests Miss Brennan is an unfit guardian. The evidence suggests otherwise. Petition denied. Vernon's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, you're making a mistake. This woman, the judge interrupted, has proven her claim through multiple witnesses and documented evidence. She has raised her niece to be competent and educated, and she has exposed fraud in territorial surveying that this court will investigate thoroughly. He looked at Vernon with something that might have been discussed. You, on the other hand, have been found complicit in document fraud and witness intimidation. I'm ordering you to pay Miss Brennan $2,400 in damages for legal costs, livestock loss, and water access denial. The crowd erupted again, this time in cheers and applause. Vernon's face went from red to white. $2,400. That's 6 months of operating costs at fair market calculation, the judge said. And generous, considering I could charge you with conspiracy to commit fraud. Be grateful I'm keeping this civil. Vernon gathered his papers with shaking hands, his careful polish completely gone. He looked at Cass with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said quietly. You've made an enemy of the railroad, Miss Brennan. Then I'll still be here when they come, Cass replied. I don't run. Vernon pushed through the crowd, which parted for him like he carried plague. His footsteps faded down Main Street, and with them went the threat that had hung over Cass's life for weeks. Judge Locke stood, signaling the proceeding was finished. Miss Brennan, the court apologizes for the ordeal you've endured. Justice was delayed, but it has been served. Isaiah clapped Cass on the shoulder. Father Miguel blessed her. Mrs. Chen pushed through the crowd to embrace June. Dutch Herman raised his flask in salute, and Cass stood on the church steps in the August heat, surrounded by people who'd chosen truth over fear and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt like she belonged. The check arrived 3 days later, delivered by a bank courier who wouldn't meet Cass's eyes. $2,400, signed by Vernon Locke in handwriting that looked like it had been carved into the paper with a knife. Cass deposited half at the bank. Hartwell processed the transaction in silence and kept the rest in cash for supplies and emergencies. She paid Mrs. Chen what she owed, paid Isaiah for his testimony time, tried to pay Dutch for the photograph. Dutch refused. Keep your money. Watching Vernon Locke eat crow was payment enough. Word came a week later that Vernon had left Red Bluff. The Kansas and Oklahoma Rail Company had withdrawn their authorization after the fraud investigation. Revealed he'd been inflating property values and pocketing the difference. He'd taken the first train east back to whatever failure he'd been running from when he'd arrived. The railroad would still come eventually. Progress always did. But it would come honestly now, negotiating with property owners instead of stealing from them. Tommy Watkins lost his territorial surveyor certification, but found work as Isaiah's apprentice. Turned out he had steady hands for metal work and a desperate need to build something real instead of altering maps for money. Father Miguel continued his ministry, but with a new confidence. He'd chosen truth over safety once, and it had cost him nothing but fear. The town slowly remembered how to look Cass in the eye again. And on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after the hearing, the rain finally came. Cass was mending fence when she smelled it, that particular scent of water meeting dust, sweet and electric. She looked up to see clouds building from the west, dark and heavy with promise. The first drops fell fat and warm. Within minutes it was pouring, the kind of rain that soaked through clothes in seconds and turned the prairie into a celebration. June ran out of the cabin, laughing, spinning with her arms spread wide. She'd been subdued since the hearing, processing everything that had happened, everything they'd almost lost. But now she was 16 again, young enough to dance in the rain without caring who saw. Cass walked to the well, cranked the pump handle. Water came up clear and cold, splashing into the trough she'd repaired that morning. Ember trotted over to drink, and Cass ran a hand down the Mustang's wet neck. "We made it," she said to the horse. "We actually made it." Isaiah arrived an hour later, riding through the rain like it was the best weather he'd seen in years. He helped Cass finish the fence repairs, working in companionable silence, while water dripped from their hat brims. When the work was done, they sat on the cabin porch and watched the storm roll across the prairie. June brought coffee, and they drank it while lightning flickered in the distance. "You know, Vernon was right about one thing," Isaiah said eventually. "What's that?" "Railroad's still coming. Maybe not his railroad, maybe not his route, but it's coming. This territory's changing. Getting civilized, if you want to call it that. I know. You ready for that?" Cass looked out at her land, her proven, legal, documented land, and thought about everything she'd fought for. The homestead wasn't just property. It was proof that a woman could hold ground against men with money and power, that truth could beat lies if enough people were brave enough to speak it. "I reckon I'll adapt," she said. "Same as I've adapted to everything else." What about June? Girl's gonna want more than breaking horses eventually." "Then she'll get more. I'll make sure of it. But she'll get it here, on her terms, not shipped off to some school because men decided she needed civilizing." June appeared in the doorway, holding the braided lariat Cass had been teaching her to make. The rope wasn't perfect. Some sections were tighter than others, a few strands uneven, but it would hold. It would do the job. "Finished it," June announced, pride in her voice. Cass examined the rope, testing its weight and balance. "Good work. Strong at the mended places, just like it should be." June smiled. "That's what you always say. Things that break can be mended stronger." "Because it's true." They sat together on the porch, Cass, June, and Isaiah, watching rain fill the well and green the prairie. Ghost was buried under the cottonwood tree, but Ember stood guard in the corral. The cabin still needed repairs, the fence still needed work, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight they had water, land, family, and justice. Tonight, that was enough. Later, after Isaiah rode home and June went to bed, Cass sat alone on this porch with her leather journal open on her lap. The rain had gentled to a whisper, steady and patient, the kind that soaked deep instead of running off. She wrote by lamplight, adding to the record she'd kept since her brother died. Not just accounts and dates, but thoughts she couldn't quite leave unspoken. Tonight she wrote about fear and courage, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, about how justice wasn't something the powerful granted. It was something the powerless had to take by standing together. Inside, June's breathing had steadied into sleep. The girl still wore her father's belt buckle even to bed, that piece of metal and memory that had become armor and anchor both. Cass touched the braided lariat hanging from the porch post. June's first complete rope, imperfect but strong. Like everything worth keeping, the well was filling. She could hear water trickling into the reservoir, that sound of life returning after drought. Tomorrow she'd ride to town, order supplies, maybe look into buying another horse, start rebuilding what Vernon had tried to tear down, but that was tomorrow. Tonight, she just sat and listened to rain, on a roof she'd helped build, on land she'd proven was hers, beside a niece who'd chosen to stay when she could have been taken. Vernon Locke had tried to take everything using the law as his weapon. He'd forgotten that laws were just words on paper, and paper burned easy. What lasted was memory, testimony, people willing to stand up when standing up cost them something. Cass closed her journal, ran her thumb over the rope calluses on her palm. The same hands that had broken horses and mended fence had also held documents that saved everything. Strength came in different forms, and she'd learned to use them all. Ember shifted in the corral, a dark shape against darker night. The Mustang nickered once, soft and safe. "I know," Cass said to the horse, to the rain, to the night itself. "We're home." She rose, went inside, and closed the door gently behind her. The lamp stayed burning in the window, a signal to travelers, a promise to herself. Some women ran when trouble came. Some women learned to break wild things without breaking their spirit. And some women stood to their ground because the ground was worth standing on, and running just meant you'd have to face yourself somewhere else. Cass had done her running. Now she was staying. The rain continued through the night, soft and steady, washing dust from the land and filling wells that had run dry. By morning, the prairie would be green again. By morning, everything would start over. But tonight, in the space between what was lost and what was saved, there was only peace. And that was enough.